Okay, so I want you to imagine for a moment, I am driving down Market Street, wind in my hair, zooming at 90 miles an hour. You got that in your head? If you can imagine that, then you can probably imagine what's going to happen next, right? I'm going to get in trouble or somebody's going to get hurt. Right? I think that's a really helpful analogy also when it comes to thinking about our emotions, particularly when it comes to conflict. Because our emotions are a lot like miles per hour, and we really want to try to keep them kind of under the speed limit, lest we redline when we start to get hurt or get into trouble, right? And mindful conflict is a really important topic because, of course, we're going to have conflict in our relationships, and handling our conflicts make a big difference in keeping our relationships healthy. A lot of what we'll talk about today is actually based off of a type of therapy called dialectical behavioral therapy, or DBT, which was created by Marsha Linehan and also further researched by Dr. Frusetti. But I want to make clear that I am no therapist, I am no clinician, and all of my expertise comes from real life. So when we talk about emotional dysregulation, which is a term that I found out is really behind what it is that's raising our negative arousal. In order to explain this, I'd like for you to think of a time where you yourself became dysregulated. Think of a time where you kind of lost it. Maybe you said or did something that you regretted in a fit of emotion. Holding that thought into your mind, if you could, just take a step back from that cliff. What was going on in the environment? What was going on in your body? Were you tired? Maybe you hadn't eaten today. What if you'd had maybe an experience earlier in the day that you're kind of bringing with you into this scenario? All of those different factors are called emotional vulnerability factors. These are the types of emotional factors that really make you more vulnerable to emotional dysregulation. Another ingredient in developing dysregulation is a pervasive environment of invalidation. So let's talk about those two factors individually. There's a very simple way to reduce your emotional vulnerability, and that's simply through self-care. Things like making sure that you get the right amount of sleep, that you are getting the right foods to eat, that you're doing one thing every day that makes you feel proud of yourself. Those are the types of things that can lower your vulnerability so that you don't kind of get to that red line stage. And then there's a concept called invalidation. So I don't want to re-traumatize you guys, but I am going to ask you to think of another negative, deeply negative emotion that you probably experienced. And I want you to think back to the last time you had to call customer service for your cell phone provider, right? Or maybe it was your cable company, or maybe it was that bank error that was not in your favor. You know, and you're already paying for this service, and the onus is on you to fix a problem that they caused, right? So you have to call customer service, and then you're put on hold, right? Or you're transferred 5 or 7 times, and then you finally get to the one person that's going to solve the problem, but they don't have any clue about what they're talking about, and they can't understand you at all. You know that feeling that you get when you go through that, right? It's kind of like a rising negative arousal, right? It turns out that what's behind that, what your experience is invalidation. Basically, it's like a rejection of what it is that you're going through. They're basically saying that what you're thinking, feeling, or how you're behaving isn't correct. And studies show that that, in fact, increases your negative emotions. On the other hand, there's another concept called validation. And it's in that similar situation where you have to make that phone call and you finally get a hold of somebody who gets it. And that person maybe even can't solve your problem, but at least they can listen to you, they empathize, and they get it. And then they can start working on problem solving. That feeling that you get when you finally get a hold of that person, you finally feel like your emotions are starting to settle down, that's caused by validation. And it's a really significant tool. In fact, studies show that it can reduce negative arousal by 50%, which is quite a bit. I mean, when you think about driving down Market Street, it's a lot easier to maintain at 45 miles an hour than it is at 90, am I right? So this is like a magic wand to reduce your emotional negativity state, not only of yourself, but for other people. So when you find yourself in conflict, if you can use this tool just by showing understanding and empathy, then you can reduce that other person's negative arousal by half. You yourself are way more likely to get what you want out of that conversation. So we've kind of talked about how we can use self-care to reduce our vulnerability. We've talked about how we can use validation to reduce negative arousal. Let's kind of take those new concepts and try to apply them to a real-life conflict situation. We're going to talk a little bit about a typical model of communication. So communication usually starts with an event. The event is neither good nor bad, it just happens, right? So in my real-life example, I'm sitting at the kitchen table, my husband comes home from work, and the door slams shut behind us, right? So I'm not freaking out, right? It's just the event is that slammed door. And what happens? Well, I get this heightened arousal. So heightened arousal is not freaking out, but it's kind of like spidey senses. So whatever I was thinking about at that kitchen table, I'm no longer thinking about that. I'm now thinking, whew, the door slammed, what should I do? What's going on? How do I need to change? How do I need to react, right? But I'm not sitting at the kitchen table in a vacuum. I've had my whole day already. I've had my whole week. I've had my whole life, and all of that is sitting with me at the kitchen table, and I'm looking through all of that at that door slamming. Those are your vulnerability factors. And in fact, in this case, I was getting sick. I hadn't eaten yet. I was a little bit hangry. And then the door slammed. But I'm still not freaking out. Not until this happens. And this is kind of the big bad wolf in our communication fairy tale. It is judgment. I think some judgment thought. I think, he still hasn't fixed that door. It's been 5 weeks. I could have called the landlord. He said he could do it. He is so lazy. That is so inconsiderate. And almost as soon as I have that judgment thought, I inaccurately express it. I turn to him and I say, you're such a jerk. I can't believe you haven't fixed that door yet. You know I don't like loud noises. And that becomes his event. Poor guy. And he's already had his whole day. He's had his whole week. He's had his whole life. He walks into that event and has a judgment thought, inaccurately expresses it as, can't even walk through the front door and you've already on my case? I just want to get a beer and settle down and relax. What's wrong with you? And you can see how we're escalating, right? And where in this whole communication model do you see validation? But luckily, there's an alternative. And the alternative is simple, although maybe not easy when you're in the moment. It is simply accurate expression followed by validating response. So an accurate expression, what is that? That's an I feel statement. I feel blank. Not I feel like you're a big jerk, because that would be cheating. But more like I felt startled when the door slammed because I think I'm getting sick. I just need quiet. Or I feel frustrated that you haven't fixed the door yet. What's up with that? And those kind of accurate expressions can elicit a validating response. I feel sick. Oh, I'm sorry, baby. Can I get you something? Or I feel frustrated. I know, right? Me too. I was supposed to borrow that part from Rick, and he hasn't shown up to work. I guess I'm going to have to buy that part myself. And you can see with the alternative model, we're actually being effective, right? We're actually problem solving, and we're actually connecting. And what's beautiful about this alternative model is that even if, and in fact I was vulnerable and I did kind of lose it a little bit, even when that happened at the kitchen table when he walked in and I kind of lost it, he was able to bring it back around because he was able to accurately express. If I lost it, he walked in and he says, whoa, Julie, I'm a little concerned that you just started yelling at me and I just got home. What's going on? And what can I reply, right? I'm like, oh, I'm sorry, I'm getting, got this headache, I think I'm getting sick. So even if one person loses it, it can be brought back around by somebody else taking the reins and using that alternative model. So we've talked about how we can reduce our vulnerability through self-care strategies, right? We talked about how we can take inaccurate expression and turn it into accurate expression through the alternative model. I would be remiss if I didn't at least touch base on the big bad wolf of the story, right, on judgment. So we're going to get a little philosophical here and talk about how we can get unstuck from judgment. So dialectics is, of course, probably pretty important since this is based off of dialectical behavioral therapy. And it basically means that two opposing viewpoints can both be accurate at the same time. They seem like opposites, but they can both be right. And the simplest way I know to explain this, if I pointed a flashlight straight down the middle of this room and say you guys were looking at it this way, you guys were looking at it this way, and I asked y'all, is this pointing towards your right or towards your left? You would say towards your right. And you guys would say, no, it's pointing towards your left, correct? So right and left, they're opposites. But we all know that those are both correct statements. And that's kind of what dialectics is. It's two opposite ideas can and are both true at the same time. And also, depending on your perspective, they also might both be wrong. And not only that, to even blow your mind further, neither of y'all own the truth. The truth is just out there, and you're just viewing your little narrow perception of it, which was shaped by my question and the answer choices I gave you. And one more thing is that truth changes over time. So as your understanding and perspective changes, maybe grows, your perspective of the truth also grows, and it becomes more, well, truthier. So keep that in mind, and I will put this in a real life example. So this happened about a year ago. My husband took a business trip, and I went along with him just for, the hotel pool, right? And we took the kids, and the idea was I'll go out explore Memphis during the day. We'll meet up after his work day for dinner. Well, one of those nights, he had one of those VIP dinners with the VIPs, right? And I wasn't invited, so I was accurately expressing that I felt jealous. And he says, okay, well, what, do you want me to bring you back something? And I was like, well, yes, I do. And he's like, okay, what do you want? Well, I'm from Texas, so you know what I want. I want a steak. And he's like, all right. I'm like, really? Because, time out. This is unlike him. He doesn't normally bring back stuff from his dinners, right? So I was like, really? And he says, yeah, it's fine. I was like, okay. So I really wanted to be clear on this because now I'm getting my hopes up on a steak, okay? So I was like, okay. So at this point, I'm making eye contact, all right? And I'm like, so you understand that I'm not eating cheese pizza with the kids. I'm eating a steak that you're bringing me back, and that's going to be my dinner. And you get that. And he's like, yeah, I get it. I was like, oh, okay, great. So a couple hours pass, and he comes back with his to-go bag, and he pulls out dessert for the kids. No steak. No steak. And I'm like, where's my steak? And he's like, what steak? And I'm like, what do you mean, what steak? You said you understood. And he says, I didn't understand that. And I'm like, are you kidding me? And at this point, I'm having some negative arousal, okay? On a scale from 1 to 10, it's getting up there. And I'm like, I can't possibly understand how you didn't understand. In fact, I know I'm right, y'all. In fact, I have 2 kids here that are eyewitnesses to this whole thing. I know I'm right. But then I remembered, because I was studying dialectics, oh man, this is a dialectic. I can't understand how you could possibly be right. But I know I'm right. And dialectics says that maybe you're right too. So I started thinking through my goals. What are my goals? Well, to have steak dinner, that's not going to happen. My other goals are to have a good relationship, to teach my kids how to handle big emotions. So what do? You eat dessert for dinner. That's what you do. And folks, I want to end this by kind of putting this thought in your mind. None of these concepts will mean anything to you if you don't apply them. You do have to practice validation. You have to practice self-care. You have to practice that model. You have to practice dialectical thinking. Neurology is like a pathway, and the more often you walk it, the easier that pathway is, the wider, the broader, and the more often you can walk it. Thank you for your time. Y'all drive safe down Market Street and enjoy your dessert for dinner.